the scandal that nearly destroyed Freddie Mercury's career. The press called it the scandal of the decade. Freddie Mercury's private life was front-page news, and Queen's future hung by a thread. This is the story of how he survived the storm that threatened to end everything he'd built, the betrayal that cut deeper than any tabloid headline, and how rock music's most guarded secret became the weapon that almost destroyed its greatest performer. March 1977. Queen was at the absolute peak of their commercial success. Bohemian Rhapsody had dominated charts worldwide. A Night at the Opera had gone multi-platinum, and the band was selling out arenas across the globe. Freddie Mercury was living the rock star dream: wealth, fame, adoration from millions. But behind the glittering facade, he was about to face his worst nightmare. What happened over the following months would test everything Freddie believed about fame, privacy, and the price of success. A scandal was brewing that would expose the most intimate details of his personal life to a public that wasn't ready for the truth. And the person who triggered it all was someone Freddie had trusted completely. This is the story of betrayal, survival, and how close we came to losing Freddie Mercury forever. The perfect storm. The mid-1970s were a complicated time for anyone living a non-traditional lifestyle. Homosexuality had only been decriminalized in the UK in 1967, and societal attitudes remained deeply conservative. For public figures, being outed as gay was career suicide. It meant lost endorsements, canceled tours, destroyed reputations, and in many cases, the complete end of their professional lives. Freddie Mercury had always been intensely private about his sexuality, not out of shame, but out of pragmatic understanding of the world he lived in. He'd carefully constructed a public image that was flamboyant and theatrical, but strategically ambiguous. His relationship with Mary Austin provided convenient cover, allowing the press to assume heterosexuality while Freddie maintained his actual romantic life in complete secrecy. But by 1977, maintaining that secrecy was becoming increasingly difficult. Freddie's lifestyle was changing as his wealth and fame grew. He'd begun frequenting gay clubs in London and Munich, purchasing properties where he could live more openly, and surrounding himself with a social circle that included many openly gay men. The walls he'd carefully built around his private life were developing cracks, and certain people had noticed. One of those people was someone Freddie considered a friend, a journalist named Derek Taylor, who had been given unprecedented access to the band during their rise to fame. Taylor had accompanied Queen on tour, attended private parties, and gained Freddie's trust through months of seemingly genuine friendship. But what Freddie didn't know was that Taylor was building a very different kind of story, and the evidence he was gathering would soon explode into the biggest scandal of Freddie's career: the betrayal. The first hint of trouble came in early March 1977, when Freddie received an unexpected phone call from Queen's manager John Reid. "We need to meet immediately," Reid said, his voice tight with tension. "Don't talk to anyone until we've spoken." When they met at Reid's office hours later, what Freddie learned made his blood run cold. Derek Taylor had approached multiple tabloid newspapers with a detailed expose about Freddie's sexuality, complete with photographs, witness testimonies, and intimate details about his private life that could only have come from someone in his inner circle. The proposed article was devastating. It included photographs of Freddie at gay clubs, testimonies from people claiming to have had relationships with him, and detailed descriptions of parties at his home that left no room for ambiguity about his sexuality. Taylor was shopping the story to the highest bidder, and several newspapers were engaged in a bidding war for what they considered explosive material. How could he do this? Freddie reportedly said, his voice shaking with anger and betrayal. "I trusted him. I let him into my home, into my life." But what happened next would prove even more shocking, and you won't believe the lengths the tabloids were willing to go to destroy Freddie's career. The betrayal went deeper than anyone initially realized. Taylor hadn't just been gathering information for a single article. He'd been building a comprehensive dossier on Freddie's private life for over a year, systematically documenting evidence and cultivating sources who could corroborate his claims. It was a calculated, premeditated betrayal that had been planned from the beginning of their friendship. The crisis management. Queen's management team immediately went into crisis mode. John Reid assembled lawyers, publicists, and media consultants to assess the damage and develop a strategy. The options were limited, and all of them were bad. They could try to suppress the story through legal threats, but that might only delay the inevitable and make it seem like they had something to hide. They could issue a denial, but that would require Freddie to lie publicly about his sexuality, and there was too much evidence for a simple denial to be credible. Brian May, Roger Taylor, and John Deacon were brought into emergency meetings to discuss how the scandal might affect the band. The concern wasn't just about Freddie's personal reputation. It was about whether Queen could survive as a commercial entity if their frontman was publicly exposed as gay in an era when that could mean the end of radio play, canceled tours, and destroyed album sales. The tension during these meetings was enormous. According to people present, Freddie was devastated not just by the betrayal, but by the position it put his bandmates in. He kept apologizing, Brian May later recalled, as if his sexuality was something he'd done to us rather than just who he was. It was heartbreaking to watch. But the most difficult decision came from an unexpected source. Mary Austin, who had broken up romantically with Freddie the previous year but remained his closest friend, suggested a strategy that was both brilliant and risky: controlled disclosure. Rather than waiting for the tabloids to define the narrative, Freddie could give an exclusive interview to a reputable publication where he could discuss his personal life on his own terms, taking power away from Derek Taylor and the tabloid press. The devil's bargain. The strategy sparked fierce debate within Queen's inner circle. Some argued that any acknowledgement of Freddie's sexuality would be career suicide. Others believed that denial would only make the situation worse when the tabloid stories inevitably broke. The decision ultimately came down to Freddie himself, and what he chose to do surprised everyone. Freddie decided on a middle path that was characteristic of his approach to public and private life. He would give an interview discussing his bohemian lifestyle without explicitly confirming or denying the specific allegations. He would acknowledge that his personal life was unconventional without providing the clear soundbite that tabloids needed. It was a high-wire act of strategic ambiguity. The interview was arranged with a prestigious music publication rather than a tabloid, and Freddie spent days preparing with media consultants. The goal was to say enough to deflate the scandal's explosiveness without saying so much that it became the only thing people knew about him. He would be honest about living unconventionally while maintaining that his private life was separate from his music. But here's what nobody anticipated. Derek Taylor wasn't satisfied with losing control of the narrative, and what he did next would escalate the scandal to levels nobody had imagined. The photographs. 3 days before Freddie's scheduled interview, Taylor made a move that shocked even the tabloid editors who'd been negotiating with him. He released photographs to multiple newspapers simultaneously, images that were far more explicit and damaging than anyone had anticipated. The pictures showed Freddie at private parties in compromising situations that left absolutely no room for strategic ambiguity. The timing was calculated to undermine Freddie's attempt at controlled disclosure. Taylor wanted the most sensational version of the story to break first, ensuring maximum damage and maximum payment from the tabloids. It was a vicious, calculated move designed to destroy any chance Freddie had of managing the narrative on his own terms. When Freddie saw the photographs that were about to be published, friends reported that he was physically sick. These weren't just invasions of his privacy. They were intimate moments captured by someone he'd trusted, now weaponized against him. "I felt violated in a way I'd never experienced," Freddie later confided to Mary Austin. "It wasn't just about the career damage. It was knowing that someone had been pretending to be my friend while planning to hurt me." Queen's legal team immediately sought injunctions to prevent publication, but the legal ground was shaky. The photographs had been taken at semi-public events, and British privacy laws in 1977 provided limited protection. The lawyers could delay publication, but probably couldn't stop it entirely. The industry reaction. As news of the impending scandal spread through the music industry, the response was swift and brutal. Radio stations began quietly reducing Queen's airplay. Concert promoters called expressing concerns about upcoming tour dates. Record executives scheduled emergency meetings to discuss whether to continue supporting the band's new album. The homophobia of the era was laid bare in these responses. Even industry professionals who had gladly profited from Queen's success were now distancing themselves at the first hint of controversy. Several major venues threatened to cancel upcoming Queen performances, citing morality clauses in their contracts. The career that had taken years to build seemed to be crumbling in a matter of days. But something unexpected began to happen that would ultimately save Freddie's career and change the trajectory of how the scandal played out. And what happened next proves that sometimes the solution comes from the most unlikely source. The other members of Queen made a decision that was both commercially risky and personally courageous. They held a press conference where they unequivocally stood by Freddie, making clear that whatever his personal life entailed, he was their brother and bandmate, and they would not abandon him. Brian May's statement was particularly powerful. Freddie's personal life is his own business. Our job is making music together, and that's not going to change because of tabloid gossip. This public show of solidarity was remarkable for 1977. It sent a message to promoters and record executives that forcing Freddie out would mean losing Queen entirely, and Queen was too commercially successful to simply discard. The band's united front changed the calculation for everyone who'd been considering abandoning them. The public response. When the tabloid stories finally broke in late March 1977, they were every bit as sensational and invasive as feared. Headlines screamed about Freddie's secret double life and his shocking revelations. The photographs were published, though some newspapers pixelated the most explicit content. For several days, Freddie Mercury's sexuality was the biggest entertainment story in Britain. But the public response was more complex than anyone had anticipated. While there was certainly shock and some negative reaction, there was also a groundswell of support from fans who simply didn't care about Freddie's personal life. Letters poured into Queen's management office, with the overwhelming majority expressing continued support for the band and anger at the tabloid invasion of Freddie's privacy. Concert sales told an even more interesting story. Rather than declining, ticket sales for Queen's upcoming tour actually increased. It seemed that the scandal had paradoxically raised the band's profile, and many fans were buying tickets specifically to show their support for Freddie in the face of tabloid persecution. Radio stations that had reduced Queen's airplay faced backlash from listeners who called in demanding their favorite songs. Record stores reported increased sales as fans bought Queen albums in a show of solidarity. The commercial suicide that everyone had predicted simply wasn't materializing, and the industry executives who'd been ready to abandon Queen quickly reversed course when they realized the band was surviving the scandal intact. The toll on Freddie. But while Queen's career ultimately survived and even strengthened, the scandal took an enormous psychological toll on Freddie personally. Friends from that period describe him as withdrawn, anxious, and struggling with the sudden exposure of aspects of his life he'd carefully kept private. The betrayal by Derek Taylor hit particularly hard. Freddie had always been selective about who he trusted, and having that trust so calculatedly exploited made him even more guarded. He became suspicious of new people in his circle, worried that anyone showing interest in friendship might actually be gathering information for another expose. Mary Austin, who was with Freddie through much of this period, later described watching him struggle with shame, not about his sexuality, but about the loss of control over his own narrative. Freddie was never ashamed of who he was, she said, but he was deeply hurt that private moments had been stolen and commodified without his consent. The scandal also affected Freddie's approach to public appearances. He became more theatrical, more deliberately outrageous in his stage persona, as if by leaning into the flamboyant image, he could take ownership of it rather than letting tabloids define him. The increasingly elaborate costumes and dramatic performances of Queen's late 1970s era were partly armor, protecting the real Freddie from the scrutiny he'd learned was so painful. The legal aftermath. In the months following the scandal, Queen's legal team pursued Derek Taylor aggressively. While they couldn't reverse the damage already done, they could ensure Taylor faced consequences for his betrayal. Lawsuits were filed alleging breach of confidence and copyright violations for the unauthorized publication of photographs. The legal process was lengthy and expensive, but ultimately Taylor faced significant financial penalties and was essentially blacklisted from working with major music acts. No artist would trust a journalist who had so thoroughly betrayed a subject's confidence. His career as a music journalist was effectively over, though Freddie reportedly took little satisfaction in this outcome. He just wanted it to be over, Peter Freestone, Freddie's personal assistant, later recalled. The legal victories didn't undo the damage or heal the hurt. They just closed a painful chapter. But there was one unexpected positive outcome from the legal battle. The case helped establish important precedents about privacy rights for public figures in the UK, making it more difficult for future tabloid exposés of this type. In a way, Freddie's suffering created legal protections that would help other artists maintain boundaries between their public and private lives. The long-term impact. The scandal of 1977 fundamentally changed how Freddie Mercury approached his public image and his relationship with the press. He became more selective about granting interviews, more careful about who had access to his private life, and more deliberate about maintaining control over his narrative. Interestingly, the scandal also changed how Queen was perceived by their audience. The band's decision to stand by Freddie earned them a reputation for loyalty and integrity that enhanced their appeal. Fans appreciated that the band prioritized friendship over commercial considerations, and this deepened the bond between Queen and their audience. For Freddie personally, surviving the scandal seemed to liberate something in his artistic expression. The late 1970s and early 1980s saw him taking more creative risks, being more bold in his visual presentation, and writing more personally revealing lyrics. Songs like Don't Stop Me Now and Crazy Little Thing Called Love carried a defiant joy that seemed to say he wouldn't let anyone's judgment diminish his life. The scandal also brought Freddie and his bandmates closer together. The experience of weathering that storm united them in ways that the normal ups and downs of a rock band never could. They'd proven they were genuinely brothers who would support each other through the worst circumstances, and that bond would sustain them through future challenges. The lessons learned. Looking back on the scandal of 1977, several crucial lessons emerge. First, Freddie learned that his sexuality couldn't destroy his career if he didn't let it define his entire identity. He was Freddie Mercury, legendary performer and songwriter, who happened to be gay, not a gay curiosity who happened to sing. Second, the scandal taught him the value of true friendship. The way Brian, Roger, and John stood by him, risking their own careers in the process, showed him that he had family beyond blood relations. This knowledge would sustain him through later challenges, including his eventual AIDS diagnosis. Third, Freddie learned that he had more control over his narrative than he'd thought. By refusing to be ashamed or to hide after the scandal broke, he modeled a kind of courage that inspired other LGBTQ+ people facing similar exposure. He showed that you could survive having your secrets exposed and come out stronger on the other side. The legacy of survival. Today, the scandal of 1977 is largely forgotten by the general public, overshadowed by Freddie's later triumphs and eventual tragedy. But for those who study his life and career, it remains a crucial turning point. The moment when Freddie Mercury learned he could survive the worst that tabloid culture could throw at him. The scandal also marked a shift in how the music industry handled artists' personal lives. Queen's successful navigation of the controversy showed that audiences were more accepting than executives assumed, and that standing by artists facing personal scandals could be both ethically right and commercially viable. For LGBTQ+ people in the public eye, Freddie's survival of this scandal created an important precedent. He proved that while exposure was painful, it didn't have to be fatal to your career. He showed that you could maintain dignity and privacy even after your private life became public knowledge. Perhaps most importantly, the scandal refined Freddie's understanding of the difference between privacy and secrecy. He learned that he didn't owe anyone explanations about his personal life, but he also didn't need to live in fear of exposure. This balance would define his approach to public life for the rest of his career. That's the untold story of the scandal that nearly destroyed Freddie Mercury's career and how he survived betrayal, exposure, and the cruelty of tabloid culture to emerge stronger than ever. If this story moved you, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join the Mercury Moments family for more hidden chapters from Queen's legendary frontman's life. Give this video a thumbs up if you believe in standing by people during their darkest moments, and let us know in the comments about the importance of loyalty and friendship. Until next time, remember, surviving scandal requires courage, but overcoming it requires the support of people who truly love you.